Historically, PRX has had one of the lowest play rates of Sova and Fade out of all VCT teams in the previous 2 years. When we look at the pick rates of Sova or Fade at Champs in 2023, PRX didn't play a single map with either agent. A big reason for this is because Sky was strong at the time, so she could collect decent info while still being a very strong support tool for their aggressive playstyle. At the beginning of 2024, Sky was nerfed by removing rechargeable birds and weakening her dog's clearing capabilities. Both these changes directly affected her info gathering capabilities. By Champs in 2024, we saw a major shift towards Fade and Sova being played. PRX obviously didn't have a big sample size of maps at this tournament, but even then, it really shows how insanely important Fade and Sova became by the end of 2024 compared to 2023. 4 teams in 2023 didn't play a single map with either agent, but by 2024, 5 teams, including the champions in EDG, did not play a single map without an info initiator, with the rest of the teams not too far behind. This was another massive meta shift that PRX had to adapt to. Every other team was way ahead of PRX in figuring out how this info utility should be used. A standard practice today involves using aggressive utility off of info utility, and here's a great example from G2 in their match against Sentinels. In this round on Fracture, G2 are moving into a B hit. Most of you would probably think hitting B just means you should immediately toss Taeho and Breach utility into heaven. But watch how G2 uses the Taeho drone to clear the site and scale up behind it, while Breach is just holding out his stun. Breach is waiting to see what info the drone gets them, and in fact, other than Brim Smokes, G2 uses no other utility until the drone finds something deep into heaven. Then, Breach uses an Aftershock to help keep control, and Raze finds a kill because of the deeper usage from the Boombot. Having good info in a comp means that you get to use all your other utility much more efficiently.
On through the choke point, it's a full line Armageddon, there's no chance. You've done so. You've done so.
Playing with Sova or Fade not only gives you better util to work with compared to a second duelist, it empowers all other important cooldowns in your comp to be saved for later or used more efficiently. Now let's go back and compare these examples to what we saw from PRX against EG. With no info besides the KO knife in their comp, PRX can't effectively deduce any enemy locations. This results in harbor ulting a site with nobody on it and wasting all the other exec util they blew. They already don't have that much util to begin with because they're playing double duelist, but lacking that standard Sova info just leads to wasting even more. All these factors are why we saw PRX start to play the more standard comps during the offseason and during kickoff this year. And while this might have helped with some of their post-plant problems, being able to fully utilize these new comps, given their playstyle, is an entirely different story. Out of the 7 maps they played this season, they played 3 with Sova or Fade, and not only did they lose on these maps, they looked pretty bad on most of them. Having the players learn new agents and change their tendencies is already hard, but there are fundamental problems with how they move and play the map that diminish the impact from these agents altogether. During kickoff, we saw them play this double initiator comp on Abyss, but we still saw them playing the map in the exact same way they always have, even though their comp has completely different tools than before. We saw numerous death ball attempts through B main over and over, not really caring how many DFM players are there, and once again relying on winning big team fights to win rounds. Their initiator utility is entirely used to support them fighting sites, and although this is still strong, what's the point of picking agents like Cypher or Sova if all you're trying to do is peek and fight? Abyss is such a large map that defenders have trouble covering all the holes and lurk opportunities, and that's why teams are playing these high info comps to begin with. You want strong info tools on the default to be able to challenge these holes and play for map control. Cypher is a really simple and good example of this because the cam on Abyss offers so much great info and empowers incredibly strong control on any part of the map you choose. Now let's see how PRX uses Cypher on this map. We saw the cam placed multiple times to passively watch for the push from B main. Sometimes this was the main tool to watch flank because Cypher would join everyone else on site. In the rare round, we're going to see Cypher start in some sort of lurk position split from his team, but he usually just joins the rest of his team to 5-man the sites before he's applied any real pressure. This is just one map where Cypher was underused by PRX, but because of how fast these rounds go, there are obviously countless missed opportunities on Sova and KO as well. Their attacker side variations this game included going B, but 5-man running back to A when they were hit by the KO knife, instantly pressuring mid, but actually sending 5 people through B main, or faking mid control with utility, but then instantly moving into a big exec on A. This pattern becomes really readable, and it doesn't take long for teams to realize that everything mid is just a fake. PRX have no idea how to actually use mid as a real tool to win the map. They have no defaulting that sets themselves up to be flexible. They're always committed to one side or the other at the start of every round, and only rotate out when they know that all 5 players are stuck. Creating complex mid-rounds is a big strength of playing info initiators to begin with, and PRX are completely ignoring that aspect of their gameplay. I truly believe that this is the meta which requires the best mid-routing out of all the metas we've seen before. Teams who understand this can completely pick apart PRX's attack sides, because a strong retaking team like G2 is never trying to fully fight PRX back. Their only goal is to smother them in the corner that PRX backs themselves into.
A lot of space here as well. Give away that information. They know exactly where something is. He's stunned up, gunned up, Leaf, able for 1. Keeping it competitive. G2, 3 versus 2. Having to fight through the pit, though, could be the advantage they need. In goes the Thrash, and Mindfree can't quite dodge it. They know exactly where he is. The pressure is on Jing. He has to cover this man to keep the pit online, to keep the chances there for PRX.
Lastly, I've been talking a lot about their attack side for most of this video, but their biggest problems on defense also stem from the exact same issues. Just like on attack, PRX only know how to take big fights to win rounds, so for a long time, PRX have run huge group pushes as soon as the barriers drop. They've perfected this to the point where you aren't even safe in your own spawn, but teams have also learned to counter these pushes. At first, teams would just hold, and this seemed to work okay, just like we saw FPX do in 2022. But PRX also got better at these pushes and were able to punish teams who were spread too thin across the map. Instead of just holding PRX, modern day teams know that they can probe for key info that signals where PRX are making their big push, and then they can quickly push somewhere else, putting PRX out of position and forcing them into retake scenarios. You might think I'm saying that PRX needs to play less aggressively, but the problem isn't their aggressive nature, it's exactly how they're pulling it off. Take note that every single time PRX are aggressive, they must be grouped as a death ball, and this fundamentally means they're leaving a lot of holes around the map for attackers to abuse. Ideal macro means that everybody on the map knows how to play off everyone else, regardless of where they are. Defense simply requires you to be more spread out than attack does. We can trace a lot of mistakes on defense back to this core issue of PRX simply not knowing how to play as a team when they aren't grouped and fighting. Here are a couple really good examples from their match on Pearl against DFM. PRX starts this round by challenging a main control. They're able to fend DFM off of it and secure an orb for Phoenix. Now, they give up A main control and fall back to site, and you can tell they're trying to figure out where to go next. Art is left open this entire time, but Phoenix decides to go to spawn to enter B link through the sewer. For a second, he's about to check Art, but then we see PRX's tendency to force grouping, and he decides to join with his team at doors. PRX definitely looked for fights this round, but they didn't take any map control. Think about that. They actually have less control of the map than they did before they took those fights, and just created holes in their own setup, while DFM are able to stroll through Art onto A, barely using any util at all. The more you watch, the more you realize that PRX simply has a very weak grasp of macro, and deducing where enemies really are. This is probably one of the most fundamental skills on defense, but they try to get away without knowing just by creating the PRX death ball. In this round, we're seeing 3 players work into a mid-round A push. DFM throws a flash to fake Art control, but the Killjoy turret hasn't shot yet, so it's clear they haven't entered the space. Jett still has not seen anything in B long, so that means DFM must either be right outside of mid or in A main where PRX are about to push with their strong side. But instead of waiting for the A main push to gain some information, we see a panic smoke Art when the Killjoy turret is still up, and then Phoenix walks up close to double doors where there's still an alarm bot he could play off of. What's the point of playing Killjoy if none of her utility is going to be used? Phoenix dies with all his utility up and on the weakest part of the map, which enables DFM to continue you onto B. I fully understand why he took this angle because it's so advantageous for defenders, especially if you have a stinger, but this is a perfect example of PRX's overarching problems. They don't have a good understanding of macro, but will rely so heavily on their micro to try and get away with it, and at some point, you're just not gonna get away with it. The rest of this game featured multiple failed attempts at creating grouped fights, and in trying to do so, they constantly created massive holes in their setup without DFM having to really do anything. It's not that surprising that the first and only round that PRX won this map is a round where PRX committed to 5-man fighting towards one side of the map. While 2 players push up top mid, 3 players are set up on A to fight together, and all the micro in this fighting is so good. DFM decided to force themselves through, and PRX finally guessed right and punished them for it. But defense is not about guessing, because you have to consistently make informed decisions. DFM evidently never made this mistake again, and they destroyed PRX 13-1 on their own map pick. This is how the 2025 meta is just exposing PRX's one-dimensional playstyle more than it ever has before. This is not specifically about team comps or agents anymore. The truth is, PRX have gotten away with their crazy unorthodox style for so long that they're lacking a lot of fundamentals which are required to succeed in the current meta. It's only going to get worse if they don't learn now. But it's not going to be an easy road for them because they're behind a lot of teams in this aspect. The bright side is, if they're able to bring their fundamentals to a higher minimum standard, it makes their unorthodox aggression that much better. If they can manage to combine well-played macro rounds with their famous aggression, this is definitely a formula for success, and I can 100% see them winning a championship if they're able to pull it off. I personally hope we'll get to see a stronger and smarter PRX sooner rather than later.